Welcome. This is TrineDay's Roundtable series called Exposing the Failure of Empire and Reclaiming the Narrative Creation Process. This is Roundtable number 3, Flipping the Script of the Secret Societies. I'm Bruce DeTorres. I moderate the roundtables, and these were inspired by the Valediction, which are 2 books by Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. Book 1 is out. It's subtitled 3 Nights of Desmond. Book 2 is coming next year, and it is subtitled Resurrection. And they are about America's exploitation of Afghanistan, which began in the 1970s, and how we must put an end to empire and the use of force, and how Washington and Hollywood cast spells through the narrative creation process to make us go along with their plans. We expect to go around 90 minutes. For the first half, our panelists will teach what they want to teach, and we'll converse with each other. And then I'll invite everyone to participate in the second half. Raise your hand or say my name so I can call on you. And then at some point, I'll thank you so we can move on to somebody else. Our panelists are our host, Kris Millegan, TrineDay publisher, who has published around 150 books in the past 20 years, information and stories that the mainstream won't touch, that we are never, ever supposed to know. And Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, who were the first American journalists to enter Afghanistan in 1981 after the Soviet invasion in December 1979. And they saw and brought back the truth of what was really going on there, counteracting what the mainstream story was about what was going on there. Also, Dyer, public speaker, lecturer, comedian, and author of the popular title Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. His graduate work focused on the interplay of film, geopolitics, espionage, and psychological warfare. We're hoping that Sean Stone, filmmaker, might also still be able to join us. And I wrote a book called God School, 9/11 and JFK, The Lies That Are Killing Us and the Truth That Sets Us Free. And you can read the amazing reviews about that at brucedetorres.com. So taking a deep breath, saying what an honor it is to be here, and asking you, Kris, to please tell us what is on your heart. What should we know about the, the roundtables in general and our today's topic particularly?
Well, we're doing this, especially around Paul and Liz's book, because it takes us beyond facts. It takes us beyond the narrative. It takes us into the mystic, which we'll touch on later on. But, as I've said many, many times, my daddy told me some things I didn't understand many years ago. And one of the things he told me about was secret societies. And, I'd barely even heard about him when he talked about them. And so I wrote up something here, and I'm going to read it so that I don't just get caught up in my own words here. What are secret societies? A basic definition is an organization, a fraternal society, the members of which take secret initiation oaths, share secret passwords and rites, and are bound to assist each other. There are many types of and uses for secret societies. I'm going to focus on the elite secret societies composed of high income or socially influential people that have political aims. So much so that they have been made illegal in several countries, such as Italy and Poland. Current groups have antecedents. Very early on, priests understood that if they make a puff of smoke to appear or some other such mystic legerdemain, folks would bring them food, furs, and even their children and maidens to do with as they wish. Another grouping I call pirates. If you were a sea-based power, you could gather knowledge and then use that secret knowledge against the landlubbers, even use it to lord over them. Over time, they became criminal gangs, using their secrecy and hidden power to control events in their favor. We see vestiges of this in our modern mafias that have codes of secrecy. The priests and pirates may compete, they may collude, or even unite with the ebb and flow through history. But they have remained a major behind-the-scenes power structure, not just in the West, but in the whole world. And now a secret society's main goal is to stay in existence, in power, in control, and control of events and history, our children's future being one of their main concerns. Some claim a continuity all the way back to Babylon, Egypt, and Atlantis. I cannot confirm that, but I can trace some of the activities of their modern scripts starting in the 16th century. Yes, there are Knights Templars, Rex Do, and other earlier groups. The main link to the earlier times is that blue blood claim some ideology and genealogy, but then usurpers tend to create their own links. And why do the blue bloods think they're blue? Because it is their secret way of saying they are the house of David and are related to Jesus, so everyone should just bow down and let them rule. And so what is the script? Again, it's control of us. The main obstacle has been the march of history towards justice and our collective attempts to gather together in political units that are not under hierarchical feudal control. They lay down tracks for several different lines. Currently, the main one is to rule the world through China. Their mode of control has been a leviathan of 3 levels with 3 parts to each. This monstrosity has a need to morph as we are entering by many measures a new paradigm. The old ways are not sustainable. The current model of mining metal and money, drugs, guns, and oil, media, movies/music, quote unquote magic is changing. The top level is being threatened with blockchain technology. The middle level is losing its cash cows, and the bottom level is close to being co-opted by social and media production technology. All they really have is virtual control through electronic ledger blips and sophisticated electronic psychological warfare blips, mostly the pharma commercials. The raw power that they control is farmed out. They do not flip the switches. They hire us to do that, okay? And we can, you know, I'm imploring people that are working for them to turn on their masters. There are secret societies all over the globe, and they all generally work the same way. Secret societies are structured like a pyramid. You have a large group at the bottom. In Masonry, they call them pork brethren. They're useful for favors and getting things done. Then you have an administrative cadre because somebody has to turn the lights off and on and keep records. Then you have a core group, which are generally built around bloodlines. Secret societies work by taking notes, and they have notes for hundreds of years, okay, that they refer to. Sussing out social and economic dynamics, gathering information, controlling markets, and war. In Skull and Bones, you do not ask to join, you are tapped. They watch you for 3 years. They have a good idea of who they are getting and how they may be used. You have legacy members, and then they will tap popular scholars and athletes and then invite them to parties and introduce them to their sisters. Skull and Bones and other secret societies forge deep links to Chinese secret societies with trade, opium becoming a major item in the 1800s. Mao worked for Yale and China in his formative years. By keeping parts of the world off market, by declaring them communist or other things, it allows groups to consolidate their power in the world. The script so far and the basic target has been the American Republic, because, you know, America is the result of many years of having to deal with the perfidy and coming up with a system how to get away from it and have people rule. Okay, and so after well, there's a long part about generational control and how they have done their script, and I've talked about that a lot before. But basically, they targeted the teens and preteens in the 1860s, and that was our civics generation. We didn't have our civics backbone, and so the people from the shadows were able to do much damage to our country with unsalvaged debt money, the 16th Amendment, and every 20 years, every generation. What did your daddy do in the war? What did your daddy do in the war? Because they were targeting the kids who were teens and preteens in the 1860s. I mean, in the 1960s. And it was a counterbalance to this war generation. Okay. And they were trying to use the Hegelian dialectic. And, you know, Hegel isn't a bad guy. It's just that, you know, this thing that he declared that, you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis is something that the secret societies have used to advance their agenda.
And speaking of agendas, can I play the antithesis and recommend that you've just laid a great table? Should we let the next panelist?
I just got just a little bit left here. Okay, the secret societal system is above our sovereign countries. And according to a book we published, The Nebula by Walter Baines, based on a Belgian state police report, at the top of this pyramid are several affiliated groups called the Order. There's a Jewish group, a Catholic group, a Muslim group, an Oriental group, a gay group. And then they influence sovereign countries in geopolitical games. Okay, and part of their long play in 1974 was sending George H.W. Bush to China, his skull and bones brother, Prescott Jr., to Shanghai to send out the money to build all those factories. So now we have a situation where they're going to try and play us Americans, and the Chinese are going to be a boogeyman, and we have to, continue to have all these war and fighting here on this planet when we're just one planet. They're going to try and stay in control, and to do that, they will have to steamroll some of the controlling lies, such as the JFK assassination, 9/11, and the drug prohibition's work. These are control points. And if we accept those, what else will we accept? People around the world need to understand that controlled geopolitics and the psychological warfare. By understanding, we can rise above all of this and create a new world. Okay, I'm done.
And we could talk for days about all that. And I'm glad this is recorded, and this will be available within a day or two, forever on YouTube or whatever, however that goes. Paul and Liz, take it away. What do you want to say about what you brought or what Kris said and anything else? You are muted.
I was being good. Yeah.
What Kris said is very important for us all to understand and remember. And I know that probably our audience is very well aware of many of the things that Kris has talked about because of the books that he has written and published over the years. So Kris is we're gonna have to get Kris a knighthood somewhere. I think in
People's Knighthood.
A people's knighthood. Benight him for the service that he's provided for information and for our democracy in this country. And just to reiterate, I got started in this. I was 29 years old, and I had done a documentary for my local TV station, which I was a talk show host for. And we came across this documentary that the station was running called The Salt Syndrome, which was this right-wing defense industry supported documentary that had, as they said, Reds under the bed and missiles about to hit the U.S. and how the Carter administration was basically, wimping out in terms of its response to Soviet aggression all over the world. And my God, the world was coming to an end. And if we didn't get a Republican president, then that was going to be the end of the world and the end of the United States. So we were going to lose our sovereignty and everything else. So as a result of that, I went to the general manager and said, look, we have this thing called the equal time provision, and you really have to balance that with something. And so they allowed me to go on. And Bruce, did you want to say something?
No, it seems the unmuted have become muted. Please continue.
Okay. And so we continued, and we put together, we had the opportunity, this being Boston, and being a Fitzgerald in Boston is kind of like being a Fitzgerald in Dublin. You kind of get privileges that some of the people don't get simply by wagging the name around. And so using that and the fact that we knew a lot of other Irish politicians in the city who were connected to the Democratic Party, and the doors swung open and we got access to a lot of people, and we got the backstory about the way this situation really ran, and that Americans really didn't have an awful lot to do with foreign policy or defense spending. We had this thing that was created, the national security state was created. We really had, even our democracy was really in question. We had two opposite things running at the same time. We had a secret society called the Defense Establishment, and then we had this this thing for public exposure called American democracy, in which we voted. We didn't get to vote on the other part. So at any rate, as we scraped away the layers, put a documentary out called Yeah, what was it called?
Arms race. in the
Arms
economy.
race in the economy. God, it's getting old. Anyway, the arms race in the economy, a delicate balance. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan, which is exactly what the SALT syndrome and the right wing was claiming they were going to be doing. And so there we were. We went back to some of the people that we had interviewed for our documentary, and they basically said, well, it's all over. There's nothing we can do. You know, the Carter has just paved the road by appearing to be weak against the Soviet Union, and there's nothing that can be done. So we said at that point, shortly thereafter, the Soviets or the Afghan government, whichever.
Paul, if I could submit for your consideration, given the chunks we're protecting for the whole experience here,
Right?
and imagining that you're now reviewing kind of background that was kind of covered in Roundtable 1 or 2,
Okay.
how would you and Liz laser focus on, this is the third installment of everything you can and might say, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, I'll skip over some. After the first trip to Afghanistan in 1981, we were hosted at a local hotel, and one of the guests was Theodore Elliott. Theodore Elliott had been the ambassador to Afghanistan from 1973 until 1978, and his successor had been assassinated in 1979. It was a controversial event. So here we are. I am confronted. I show my documentary, a preliminary version of it, what I had experienced. And I was basically confronted with the former ambassador to Afghanistan, who assaulted me in the first question by asking who gave me the right to tell that story. I didn't realize, as an American citizen and a budding journalist, that I needed permission from the American government to tell that story. And so began our long trip down the rabbit hole of what this place really was all about. And that's what our books are all about, is our experience as we went further and further back into this myriad history of secret societies and where we came from and how we got here, what was connected to that, and discovered that it was connected to some very deep and very ancient prophecies, as well as practices by some ancient secret societies that are now fulfilling that, it would appear, in the world we are living in right at this moment.
But I'd like to add that in that particular experience, what we really got was an in-our-face confrontation with an actual human being who you could say fully represented the idea of the secret society and the control agents that really are connected to it. And the fact that he was willing to basically come into a public setting and try to shut us down and discover that it didn't work, at least not in that setting. We're fully aware of the fact that Theodore Elliott, who it turned out, we didn't know it at the time, but he turned out to be the general secretary to the Bilderbergers from 1981 to 1993. So we figured that we were put on a sort of the no-fly list, as it were, back in 1981 by that little exchange. But it really gave us a sense of the reality of the secret society people, okay, and how they operate with impunity, how they are so convinced that they have powers that are clearly that come with them. But I think what we really got from that experience with Elliott was how really vulnerable they are when directly confronted by someone who knows what they're talking about and knows what they're doing. Now, granted, we couldn't affect the mainstream narrative that Theodore Elliott was clearly protecting, okay? And Paul was being informed in no uncertain terms. You don't have a right to challenge that narrative. And ultimately, we couldn't stop that narrative from still to this day being the primary narrative that most Americans believe, which is basically summarized in the film Charlie Wilson's War. But I think our message is in understanding how truly, in many ways, limited these people are, and the fact that they're so dripping in all the support systems and the inherited wealth and all of that, and they get invited to the right parties and all that. personally, I'm not sure I really want to be at one of their parties at this point in my life. But anyway, so I think that's what we're trying to say. And that's really what we made the centerpiece of our book, The Valediction, because we finally came to understand how the experience itself and walking through it, how important it is for all Americans to really understand the true nature of that process that we experienced. So that's
Liz, would you do me a favor and take a couple of minutes before we ask Jay to contribute and to review the points you make about using facts and creating a narrative and how that is used, so that after you teach us that, that's something we can refer to for the rest of this discussion, which is the narrative creation process and its power.
Right. Well, the direct experience that we had was in actually bringing back facts that we got on the ground in Afghanistan and delivering them to CBS News to discover that the facts, as we were told by Major Karen McKay, once our documentary was out, that we don't need facts. We know the Russians are guilty, basically. And that's a quote from this person who contacted us about why we hadn't included certain information in our documentary, the same documentary that Theodore Elliott was challenging. So the point we're making is that when you actually use authentic facts and you really use the power of your artistry and you put it into a good story, I have no doubt that we can completely annihilate their phony narrative, because their narrative has no substance. It's like cotton candy, okay, versus a seriously wonderful, delicious, nourishing whole meal, okay? And that's what we have come to get, what we've become used to, is getting these thin narratives that nobody really challenges. Well, that's what we're really building here. We're building an actual new narrative with the facts, with the logic, but we're putting it into a good story.
Writing a textbook is like a recipe book. You have all the recipes there, but you don't know how it interacts with you. It doesn't interact with you.
You can't eat it.
No, but when you actually make something out of that and you weave it into an experience, then it does become real. It becomes meaningful and incorporated into your life.
And in the last couple of roundtables, Paul and Liz, you've made the point that our rulers who control the narrative, who tell us the stories through their mainstream corporate systems, are so removed from any kind of facts that it's delusional. And you've taught us that the use of power over others, as these rulers have, makes people insane. And that's why the world is being brought to the edge of so many brinks, and why it is life and death urgent to understand the power, to see through their lies, and also find the real facts, and then create a new story for humanity and the planet, so we have a chance for the good things.
Exactly.
And we have to act now.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's creating our own narrative and not trying to tear theirs down. That will collapse of its own deadness.
Right.
Once real narrative exists and gets out there.
Right. And I mean, it's so much so that, I mean, I don't exist. TrineDay doesn't exist. We don't have a Wikipedia page. We've been doing it for 20 years, have over 150 books, but, officially we don't exist. And Sean, he's in an airport right now. He had to fly today, so I don't think he's going to make it with us.
Well, we wish him well. And Liz and Paul, if you have nothing else to this, I think it's a great segue into Jay to comment on all of the above, or bring what you brought today, Jay.
Yeah, well, there were several things Kris said that I thought were really pertinent. One was the secret society element and the usage and managing of human beings through that system of control. I really see the older I get, the systems of Freemasonry and these kinds of things as tools for management of humans. If you read, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, you can clearly see that really that bunch of jibber jabber is about ways to control people. Not saying there's nothing to the mystical side of things, just pointing out that the main usage of it is pragmatic. And I thought that was a really good point from Kris. It reminds me of a couple other books that I've looked at recently, which is Builders of Empire. And that's actually about the networks of Freemasonry being an espionage network for the British Empire.
Mhm.
That's an overlooked element of what Freemasonry actually functioned as for the British Empire, back in the day when the British Empire had the power that it had before it gave way to Pax Americana. But really those systems are the same. And like Kris said, if you study the mafia, which I've kind of gotten into the last couple of years pretty in depth, studying Cosa Nostra and these different kinds of mafias, as well as, Catholic groups too, Knights of Malta. It's always the same kind of models and structures. And probably what I could speak to most pertinently would be the philosophy when Hegel was mentioned. And there's a really good book that touches on this with Hegel himself, put out by an academic back in about 2008, Professor McGee. It's called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. And what Hegel talks about is in many ways borrowed from various Hermetic schools in the West at that time, Neoplatonism, Kabbalism. And what he does is he kind of takes these old Platonic ideas and merges them with process philosophy. Ancient Greek philosophy was very focused on the static. They didn't really have much of an interest in things undergoing change or flux because they were so focused on the ideal and the abstract. Hence, they would denigrate the here and the now, right? That's Platonism. Aristotle tried to kind of move in the direction of empirical science and focusing a little more on the here and the now. But when we think of Greek philosophy, we think of the ideal, the abstract, and this is where we really get technocracy. Is from Plato and that idealistic type of system. So what Hegel does, which is an innovation there, is he weds the idealism with process. So no longer is process something bad or denigrated. It's actually part of the philosophy of evolution, which is given this sort of mystical status that everything is progressing towards what Hegel called an omega point. So the totality view, which I think a lot of the elites and the social engineers have, they see Hegel as a person whose philosophy could be very amenable to transhumanism, to managing society in all of these different oppositions, these different conflicts to get to some desired end goal. So it's really just Hegelianism is really just a technology to the elite. It's not that they're wedded to some mystic system per se. It's more of a means of getting to an end. And so that's where it works well with social engineering and psychological warfare, and perhaps even black operations, because you can manage these, not just dialectics, but trialectics and quadrilectics, right? You can have multiple people fighting with one another. And, I've not yet read Valediction. I did get my copy the other day, but I am a huge fan, of course, of Afghanistan's Untold Story. I read that years ago and took copious notes. It was really good. And I like how you guys got into the religious engineering aspect of the mystical ideas of, the British Empire being kind of a mystical imperium that wanted to, continue the ideas of the ancient Roman Empire. And now we're giving way to, Pax Americana. And now that's giving way, I think, to the new instantiation, which will be a kind of a next phase of the global imperium, of the Great Reset and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad to see that you guys are continuing your work. And a lot of people, I don't think today, especially because I know a lot of the younger crowd, I interact with a lot of people 30 and under. And I don't think they know about, the importance of Afghanistan and the, the neoconservative kind of coup that took place in the last several decades to really re-engineer America into global engine of the empire. And that's the unfortunate thing that's happened. And I did a couple interviews recently about Afghanistan, actually quite a bit based on y'all's research. So I think this is really timely information, especially with the recent resurgence of Afghanistan, a few months ago in terms of, the Biden policy disasters and all of that. So but I don't know y'all's take on that. I tend to think it was, just speculating here, but I think a lot of times there'll be these news events where they act like it's a pull out. Well, we're going to pull the troops out, but they just leave, like stay behind people and stay behind units. So they don't really pull out of the wars. There's way too much opium there. And, so I don't know what y'all's take on that is, but I just tend to be skeptical. I think most people are really skeptical of anything they hear in the media nowadays. But like you said, there's they've effectively censored, competing narratives. And so you're right that the narrative does die on its own. It's just the challenge is getting out the competing narrative.
Exactly.
Thank you. Kris, Paul, and Liz, anything at the top of the mind? Because I've got an impulse if after you.
Well, I would just like to comment on Jay's question. There's no question that you're right, that it is just about leaving Afghanistan. There's an awful lot of privatization going on. And I think people need to understand that, when privatization takes over, it means there's no history. So you talk about getting facts. There is no facts because it becomes privatized. And that is the most tragic outcome of the privatization process, which had already existed in Afghanistan, but now it will go more in that direction. And there's also talks between, I think, Pakistan and the United States to have outposts that, they want to be involved still with their drone strikes and counterterrorism. So we have a lot of issues still going on there that will be very horrible for the Afghan people.
Not to mention the fact that the Taliban were always considered to be a creation of the Pakistani military and the ISI, intelligence operations. So this is really kind of, once again, we're dealing with what appears on the surface to be something that is individual and individualized and represents a political point of view or a religious point of view, but is in fact another arm of the deep state, moving in ways that are just simply confusing to the general public.
Yeah, and the drug trade, a lot of that is moved above sovereign states, into criminal gangs.
Well, you have the underworld and the overworld, and everybody in the middle has to do what either one says or the other does. That's it.
Heaven's up there, hell's down there. Where do we live? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in danger of losing our ground right now, and that's why I think we are in an urgent moment in time in terms of the human race, and even in terms of a definition of what that human race might be. So I really think it's all the reading that we're doing, the stuff that Jay's done, the stuff that Kris has produced, and Bruce, we really need to read it and absorb it and act on it, because
that's the key, acting on it.
Right. We need to take it to a different level. I can feel that level on a daily basis now. The people I see, the things that are happening, it's different. We're moving to a very new urgent moment.
There are folks in the audience. We're going to open it up to audience participation, and we'll start by me just looking for people to raise their hand or call my name, or if not, there's a while we're mulling on that, I want to ask Jake Klizek, what are your thoughts? Because I heard us already talk about some areas that are in your expertise there, alluding to the technocracy, et cetera, and you wrote School World Order. Are you up for this challenge to share what might be coming to you about all this?
I was not prepared for you to call on me. But
then you could pause, and we'll wait for other hands and volunteers. Or
let me chew on it a little bit, if you don't mind, rather than I stammer over myself.
You want to try? Yeah, right. Go. Oh, nope, he's taking a pause. Very good. I didn't hear him. And Kris,
you've got Todd Armstrong there wants to talk.
Oh, I don't see that screen. Todd, unmute yourself, please. Host of Goodness Over Darkness podcast. Can you hear us, Todd?
Oh, he's got a problem.
He's breaking.
Todd, you're breaking up. Try again.
Can you hear me at all or no?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So I've been looking into the whole, what Liz was talking about. It's good to see everybody, first of all. But the whole narrative, having to shift the narrative to the truth, and the lies will just fall away. It's just inevitable. And what I had to take it back to was the origins of, basically the origins of humanity. And when we start looking at certain things in certain ways, it's actually all explained very simply in the Bible. We just, the way the Bible's taught isn't to our benefit. It's being controlled by those who want to control us. So the way to get out of, the way to reach everybody is to just provide them with the simplest explanations that, you know, we're 70% Christian in this country, or claim to be anyway. And they say very clearly in the Bible that Satan offered the throne of earth, the kingdom of earth, to Jesus Christ. So if we can just get people to understand that, no, the Bible tells us that satanic cults run the world, you know, it's very obvious. If we can harp on the simplicity of something like that, I think that is a good way to open people's minds, to get them to shift their line of thinking, like, oh, this has been in the Bible for thousands of years now. Maybe this is something that's real. What's your take?
No, I appreciate that. Do you have any particular question for Kris, Paul, Liz, or Jay to pull down more of their expertise just in a real brief minute, let's say?
So I'll say, how do you guys think that we could, as Christians yourselves, how do you think that we could, I'm not someone who knows the Bible all that greatly, what are different ways we could use the simplicity of what's actually in the Bible to convey the message that it's satanic cults that are running the world and you should stop listening to them?
I have a thought on that. Well, I think that, you know, I think we're all using a lot of sources that overlap, and certainly, you know, the Bible is clearly one of the sources for many people. We actually feel, and I think that was what I was really trying to express about our experience with Theodore Eliot. We actually feel that, I think they're given too much credit, that they're almost given power by the term satanic. It implies they have this overwhelming power, and you can't, and you have to fight them with good. But I don't feel
And a
good.
dominion.
Yeah, I don't feel good has to fight that hard, in the sense that, and this is my point, my theory is that the reason the lie exists is because the truth isn't big enough for it. The lie is actually, you know, there's a god of lies, Ahriman. So we know that there are gods of thieves, you know, that, so the idea that these things exist because of the duality. Well, if your duality is framed as good and evil, then you have an opposition that's never going to resolve it. But there are other ways to frame your duality, like male and female. That can also be a war too, we know that, but it is a different kind of war. And we can, light and dark. I think of actually light and dark as, my definition for light and dark is, I think of the light as consciousness and the dark as unconscious. And when you are conscious, you cannot misuse power the way you can when you're unconscious. And I think that's where the evil, you might call, produces itself, okay, because of the unconsciousness. And I think it may be, let's say, a more neutral way of approaching all of our differences, because, you know, I don't necessarily agree on everything with anyone. I mean, there's always going to be differences, and I don't want to suddenly find myself in a situation where if I cross a path with someone where we don't agree, that suddenly the terminology should turn to evil.
Yeah, and I think that to apply that to what Todd's point, rather than alienate anybody who has a problem either identifying as a Christian or doesn't even want to frame it as a Christian or non-Christian, Liz, conscious or unconscious, can be applied as conscious, meaning what is known, unconscious, that's what's hidden. And our job is to ferret out what is being hidden from us. And it gets back to, reality, so we can, really empower ourselves, which is the purpose of all of Kris's books at TrineDay, to make known what is being hidden and kept secret from us. I saw two hands. I saw Graham's first, and then I saw Charlotte's. So Graham, we'll ask you to unmute, and then we'll go from there. Hi.
All right. Hi, everybody. I guess I just kind of have a question that any of you can probably answer, or it's going to be a little bit of a sort of a ambiguous question. But I always thought, I've been reading these books from the late 1800s, and it seems like they, the secret, maybe not all the secret societies, of course, but the mystery schools at least. I mean, to get into those or to become a student, you were supposed to be sincere, honest, and have mastered your temperaments and failings. I mean, this was supposed to be for the good of humanity. So I guess, is this the same sort of network and they just think they're doing good, or is there a completely dark network? Like, Todd mentioned satanic, but I mean, or was there a split at some point where, people from these maybe so-called were supposed to be good for humanity mystery schools broke off? Is there a whole network of them? Like, it just seems like
That's actually a great point and a great, handleable question. I'll ask everyone who's going to participate to think in terms of make a point and ask a question. Any of our panel, what would you say to Graham?
It's like Jay said, it's a technology. Okay, it's a technology that can be used for good or bad. It depends on what you want to do with it.
Sure.
But
consciousness.
Well, Roger Fisher was a Mason, and we brought him to Afghanistan, and he was more than happy to try to resolve that problem peacefully. And he was ignored, and he was pushed away by the mainstream media and by the darker side of the craft. Let's put it that way. So, but he was completely committed to peaceful resolution and completely committed to whatever. So, and he was a very high level guy and was really committed to bringing the American people into it,
Well, I think even, Theodore Eliot actually had an encounter with Roger Fisher, which really shows you these are two guys who operated together at the Harvard Negotiation Project. They both appeared to be very dedicated to negotiation. But when it came to Afghanistan, Theodore Eliot suddenly wasn't so interested in negotiation, and Roger actually was shocked. Roger didn't understand why suddenly negotiation wasn't so powerful for Eliot. When he told him he was going to go to Afghanistan with us in 1983, Theodore Eliot went ballistic at a wedding. I guess it was a reception.
It was a reception for Elliot Richardson's niece.
Right. And he attacked Roger verbally and screamed and yelled at him. And he was stunned.
Made a scene.
So obviously, I think that's the point that, whatever somebody's associated with, there's no guarantee that defines them, good or bad. Okay. And that would be my point, I think, that I think we have to move away from approaching people with that idea that there are things I know, there are things let's try to come together on them in terms of helping each other understand our viewpoint. But we know that there are people, and I think this is where the obviously people who are very, very facile at tricking people and mind control and all the tricks of the trade. I think the idea that we know, in fact, that the CIA practices in MK Ultra and all of the things that have been used on Americans clearly is an ongoing process. And it's very much, goes back to, Edward Bernays at the beginning of the 20th century with the real elevation of propaganda and manipulation through advertising and marketing and public relations. And that has been maintained. So we know that we can see a real history and use of it. And that's where the narrative control that we encountered in 1981 and 1983 through 1987 was so total. And that's when we began to question, how in the world can we how can we do anything about that? And
luckily since then,
and the corruption of hermetic circles, started in the 15th century that we have direct knowledge of in Britain. They started using hermetic circles for intelligence work.
Mm-hmm.
Would you share for folks a handy definition of hermetic circles, please?
A mystical, a magical group, whatever you want to call it.
Based on Hermes Trismegistus.
Right.
Which is supposed to get you to the complete understanding of what it means to be a man, the meaning of man and man's relationship to God.
Right. And that reminds me of what I've recently learned about the Illuminati's original thrust that seeped into much of what we still have. It's the perfectibility of man, which is very neutral or abstract or even charming and hopeful on paper. But look what having power over others, as Liz and Paul teach us, look what it does to folks who've got. So what we're up against is folks getting nuts and using it, to exploit and hurt. I want to challenge the panelists throughout this audience participation to be thinking of some kind of hopefulness or solution, some kind of thing you'll say at the end. I'll go around the table and give everyone a turn, Kris, Paul, Liz, and Jay. And meanwhile, back to Charlotte. I know that you, yes, how are you?
Unmute.
Yeah.
Unmute. There you go.
I'm unmuted now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed the beginning of your presentation. I'm sorry, but I sort of got in when people were worried about how to get around the false narratives. And I just want to have some ideas. I want to add a couple perspectives. Some of you have heard me before. The one thing that our journalists, our academics, even our progressives, the majority are not looking at the ruling class. Because when you look at the ruling class, that very 1% of the 1%, then things start to make sense, and make sense as to why they are censoring our efforts to get the truth out. Now, I say that as a co-author of this book, Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil, published by HarperCollins and later suppressed. Okay.
I just bought that book, by the way. That's
It's a
funny.
great
What?
book, great book.
I
Yeah,
just
thank
bought
you.
that literally the other day.
Oh,
I
you
had no
did?
idea you were
No
going to be on.
kidding. No kidding. Well, I mean, we spent 18 years on trying to figure things out, and we were focusing on Latin America and the genocide of indigenous peoples, and eventually found out that evangelical missionaries were turning a blind eye to genocide because they had ties in with corporate forces, many of them from the East, and key among them Nelson Rockefeller, who built this whole hidden empire in Latin America. And so a lot of the evil stuff we were able to document, by the way, including MK Ultra, right? I had a guy from Arizona call me up recently who's a Trump supporter. And he said, hey, I just got your book. And I just cried when I saw all the horrible things that happened to the indigenous people in Latin America. And then he got on to, with COVID and all that stuff. So,
Charlotte, but if I may, what would
Yes.
you say about the secret societies? What would you say humanity can do?
yeah, well,
Or maybe think of a question for one of the panelists.
well, I just wanted to add just another bit of insight, and that is, people are beginning to understand the role of the total elites, and the hopeful sign I'm finding. By the way, Brzezinski being key, Brzezinski, who was the top guy with David Rockefeller, often missed. They worked in harmony together. Now, the grand chessboard guy, I don't know if you got into it, Paul and Liz, on this particular thing. The other part is the COP26 conference. I've been watching it. I've been watching Democracy Now!'s coverage of it. There are fantastic activists all around the world. And what they're doing is they're beginning to understand the oil connection to this whole story. Actually, probably not enough. I feel very frustrated sitting here because, as Liz and Paul know, I've given a pipeline analysis to the situation in Afghanistan, showing that the TAPI pipeline was regarded by the oil people as very key to let the energy flow south from Caspian Sea, which was seen as the great new resource of oil and gas, and have it go through Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, the TAPI pipeline. And I get sort of irritated when I have to keep raising it because people are not recognizing it. But
Charlotte,
I want to connect with those groups. That's what I'm saying. And here it is.
Thank
Here's
you.
a map of it that shows the whole thing. Okay, and it's in my
Charlotte?
book, The Crash of Flight 38004.
Can you hear me,
you
Charlotte?
information. Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Thank you. I've got to divvy up the time appropriately, and I appreciate your everything you
Thank you,
shared.
Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to read a question from Carol, whose microphone doesn't work.
Oh, dear.
I want to praise Kris again for his work, as well as for publishing Whitney Webb's work, which is so challenging. Whitney's book comes out next year, which is so challenging to the current narrative surrounding COVID-19 and the latest tyrannical onslaught against us. This past week, I've been organizing and attending rallies challenging the mandates, the attack upon 28 million children with bioweapons. Last weekend, Dr. Martin gave 2 presentations that laid out the crimes on humanity now taking place. And in his last presentation, he showed the names and faces of the 36 people most responsible for this latest assault. It is a direct attack on the narrative, and he has also tried to encourage people to create a new narrative, perhaps best framed by a declaration of universal independence. And everyone can see the link that Carol provided in the chat. I'm going to start a GoFundMe to get you a microphone, Carol, because that's always fun when we hear the distortion it did to your voice last time. Thank you for that. Yeah, and you just described, that's a worthy topic. If not, you file under the things we're up against. So looking at the time, and now I'm scanning for anyone. If I don't see a hand raised or you're having trouble raising your hand, you want to unmute and ask or say something? I see Ruth. Hi, Ruth. We can hear you.
Hi. There's a couple of things. One, just to, I happen to have studied Trismegistus, and what I know about it is that it's a system of thought that recognizes polarity as being the nature of existence. And it teaches people to understand if you have a cause, you have a reaction. And because it helps people to understand how to live in the middle place, where you're moderating and modulating, so you're not in reactivity, you're in a conscious responsibility of your actions. That's what Hermes Trismegistus was trying to teach human beings. But I do want to talk about the fact that I've been going to a lot of meetings of people in Los Angeles that are fighting against the vaccination. And I'm hearing an uprising of firemen, policemen, teachers, nurses, all kinds of public people who are recognizing the tyranny that is going on. And there are a couple of thoughts I have. One is that they understand, but their understanding is too narrow because
They're being used. They're being used to create destruct. They're being used.
I don't think they're being used. I think that they actually are understanding something about the
How many people with vaccines are in the hospital?
what I want to say.
You know, I don't want to go into this. It's a time waster. It is a tar baby. And, you know, the rhetoric is not correct. I'm telling you, COVID is a real disease. It's causing all kinds of problems. And yes, there's all kinds of stuff, but this is really a time waster, and it's not going, all it's going to do is end up with a bunch of people fighting each other. It is not going to lead us to freedom.
May I just say one thing, that I feel as though the consciousness of tyranny is very real, and their understanding of how they're being divided and how they have to unite and be one with all kinds of races, all levels of society is really quite exciting. It is. And I think so some kind of alchemy is happening there that is very important, and it's very, very big. And it is an energy that I feel needs to be tapped into.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
I'd like to say something to add to, that overall comment that you made, Kris, and that you made, Ruth, is that this is the key to me, is that everybody who has the ability to look at everybody, no matter what they are, no matter what they look like, no matter what they're saying, and say, if that person is not coming across as a human being, it's because they're in they've been, overwhelmed with the propaganda. There is a lot of effect. It's almost like people go into a state of mind. They can't be approached. What I've noticed about people who can't even talk about it, they're so dedicated to the need to hold on to. But that's what we really witnessed when it came to the whole issue of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, that everybody just went in lockstep all at once in Washington when they crossed the border, as if it was as if magic. It was a magical statement, okay? And we literally witnessed the entire bureaucracy shut down the entire concept of negotiation, of anything peaceful with the Soviet Union. So I think that would be the point that I would want to make, is that we are living through a process that really is, for the first time probably in maybe thousands of years, the evolution going back to the original Illuminati Magi, I think they were called, that were 6,000 years, the Zoroastrian Magi that were 6,000 years before Plato. So you're dealing with the origin of the duality, the good and evil, the light and dark, and we're playing out in the Hegelian dialectic, the idea that there is this process, and once you take a side, there will be another side, and that's what you have to resist. We want to get out of the duality mentality totally and get into a trinity. We've got to move from the duality to the trinity in order to get to the mystical state we really want to. Okay, so this is all part of, I think what you're witnessing, Ruth, is authentic. I think that what Kris is saying is authentic too. It's all.
I don't see difference with Kris. I'm not arguing with him, but
no, I know. I'm just saying though, what we witnessed back in 1979. Okay, when you talk about a haze going over, as if everyone was mesmerized, as if it literally black turned to white or white turned to black. So this is the point about where we are right now, is moving beyond the duality. And that's what's trapping everybody in thought. And once you get out of that right, left, good, evil, up, down, that's when you can begin to see the totality of what needs to happen, I think.
I have something more I want to share out of that, and that I do believe the real inoculation is inoculating against fear, because once you are able to enter somebody's mind with fear, that's when the dualities separate, and you are able to manipulate people. And so it's really teaching people how to hold those two things, just as you were speaking about, hold the two polarities and not be reactive, and understand them as part of a wholeness. And that is the inoculation against fear, which has been used since the beginning of time to manipulate and create war and divisiveness.
Ruth, that's very, very empowering. And it really echoes what I've heard Kris say for 14 months. I've been working with him about, they want you to choose sides. They want us to choose sides about every issue, because then they can manipulate us, and to look at everything, be very careful what you believe. And I know you, as Jake has indicated, how are you?
I'm all right. Sorry I wasn't prepared when you called on me. I didn't know if we were going to be chiming in or if I was just going to be watching. So,
and before you do, if there's anyone else who wants to speak, but you can't figure out how to raise your hand, try becoming visible and unmuting yourself. The next time we go around to the next person and just say, "I'd like to say something," Bruce, I'll catch it. But Jake, it's all yours.
Thanks, Bruce. So my book, Back Here, School World Order, Technocratic Globalization and Corporatized Education, it gets into how ed tech companies are trying to privatize the public education system, and eventually moving into transhumanist technologies and a social credit system. But I also trace the roots of that back to a secret society, the Order of Skull and Bones, and I show how there's many influential bonesmen such as George Bundy, Daniel Clayton Gilman, and several others. Even Mnuchin is sort of lends his hand to pushing artificial intelligence and things like that. I wrote an article for Kris on Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado and his connections to the order. He's the guy that made brain chips for the transhumanist movement, would have become the transhumanist movement. And one of the easiest ways to tie it into what has been said about like the secret societies, I think one of the easiest ways to see how we can trace the evolution of transhumanism and the social credit system back to the esoteric secret societies would be through sacred geometry. And so, you know, an easy way to understand that would be like if you've ever seen the movie Space Odyssey 2001, and you've got the obelisk, right? There's the famous scene where the monkey sees the obelisk and then he sees the crescent moon above it. Well, that's your square and compass. Okay. And then, you know, to make it short, that's what makes the monkeys evolve. They start to stand up and use tools. But through a square and compass, that's basically angles and curved lines. And you can make every geometric shape with either a straight line or combine them for angles or curved line. So in other words, you can use that for principles of architecture and engineering, but then you can move forward into biometrics. And if you ever see something like facial recognition scan, right, it's a myriad of different triangles. And essentially the signature, the way it converts it to a digital algorithm is to aggregate the angles on all those different triangles. So basically your biometrics and your psychometrics are also using geometry. And then if you want to talk about genetic engineering, you're talking about protein structure. So if you look at something called allotropy, that basically biochemistry functions on sort of like a lock and key in terms of the geometric shape of your molecular structure. So, you know, basically what gets a protein activated has to do with the shape of whatever antibody or antigen or whatever else biomolecularly it comes in contact with. So everything from your psychometric to your biometric to your genetics, all the way to simple stuff like architecture and engineering is basically sacred geometry. And so this leads us to this realm of social credit, where basically, right, if you've ever seen that stuff over in China, you know, it's basically you're hooked up to the Internet of Things, and through facial recognition, right, it's going to track not just what you do online, what you do in real space in real time. And it's going to determine your access to public services and also private commerce based on that. And I see it as a world without grace, right? So the idea is to make everything trustworthy. But the end result here is that you have to basically control everything, right? If everything's going to be trustworthy and secure and safe, everything has to be controlled, which means there's no room to make an error, right? You have
and at the risk of making an error, Jake, I want to ask if you're coming into a bullseye or a landing or a question next.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that, you know, I was getting right to the solution, which is that. So what's the solution to that? That's a world with grace, and it's very simple stuff like the golden rule. Speaking truth, listening to other people, you know, not being controlled by fear and anger, and, you know, doing the Gandhi thing, being the change you want to see in the world. And it's as simple as that. And then it will fall on its own, under its own weight.
Where we are in our time, the rest of this conversation for the next 20-25 minutes or so, it'd be nice if it could stay. It's not even valid. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed by the idea of grace, and now like to try to talk about some solutions. Charlotte, what have you got for us?
Unmute.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
I want to get a little historical context that might help. The origin of the West and the Souths, the right wing, their hatred of the elites. It's all described in Thy Will Be Done. It's what happened is the Rockefellers moved in to the South and took over their religious schools and took over their farming practices through agribusiness. And their churches, they introduced secularism. And this was at the early 20th century. So these people started to call the Rockefellers the Great Octopus. And they thought they were communists. Does this ring a bell? There's a legacy to this whole art.
Who thought who was communists?
The evangelicals and the farmers and the rural people who lived in the Southwest and the West.
They thought the people who were implementing Rockefeller policies were communists?
They thought the Rockefellers themselves were communists. Okay. So, but coming back to the idea of recognizing, sort of breaking through it all, there's a commonality of understanding if only people knew it. I mean, that no, they weren't communists. As a matter of fact, the Rockefellers were fighting the communists tooth and nail. And you'll see their footprint through this whole history, including Afghanistan through Brzezinski, including all the oil explorations in the Middle East. But the whole idea
Charlotte,
is that they recognized tyranny. They recognized it, and it would be interesting if we could sort of get a common understanding of
I don't
tyranny.
know if Charlotte, I'm sure I can't wait to read that book. That's I am sold. And now to impose the purpose of this roundtable of flipping the script. I am convinced that such corruption can't stand for long. I just really want to accelerate the replacement. Like Liz said, instead of fighting what we don't want, how do we build and create the kind of world we do want? And taking what Jake said about living in grace and the golden rule, who wants to take that baton?
We're doing it right now. I mean, the dynamic is happening. The dynamic is happening right now. The change is happening. And, you know, this isn't just the United States. This isn't just dealing with the elites in the United States, okay? The elites in the United States have very good relationships with elites in other parts of the world, okay? And it's not just a secret society that controls the United States. There's a secret society that controls China, okay? And just like, you know, we're being not treated very nice here as citizens, the people in China are not being treated very nice as citizens. And we aren't looking to have just, you know, a release of tyranny just in the United States. We're looking for a release and tyranny of the whole world, okay? Because a lot of what's been going on here with the secret societies is they're able to use their influence onto the sovereign countries to get the sovereign countries to fight each other, because again, that is their basic operation, is to get us to fight each other, to get us to, again, to create these different sides. And the thing I found generally is that you've got propaganda on the right, you've got propaganda on the left, and the more truth is in the center, because they'll give honest things for the left to carry, they'll give honest things for the right to carry, and then those things will get debased by having them fight each other. And then you have a big thing in the right, okay, has to have a lot of money, because there's way more people on the left than there is on the right. And so they have to put in all kinds of money onto the right to create these false battles, these fake battles that to control us all. So, you know, the way to flip the script is we're doing it right now. We're flipped the bottom level is media, movies / music, and quote unquote magic. Okay. And we're beating them on the quote unquote magic part. And every day there gets to be, it's cheaper to make movies, to make music. And every day there's more and more places to put them out there. And, you know, so and what we need to do is we need to continue to appeal to the workers of the elite, the people that are working on the media, and get them to tell their bosses to go to heck.
Well,
Jay, what does Jay have to say?
Mute. You've got to unmute.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I have a weird position of kind of appealing to a lot of millennials and people 25 and younger. So Zoomers, I guess you'd say. So I know that a lot of those people are a lot more adept at seeing through dialectics and manage conflicts than people that might be older. I'm not trying to offend anybody here that's older, but that's just been my experience, that people that have grown up on the internet for all the bad sides of it, they seem to have a aptitude for kind of picking up on things that are scams and deceptions quicker than maybe people that are used to still, the old, Tom Brokaw style news, Fox News style, one guy talking at you type of thing. But there are still, a lot of layers and nuances and complexity to all the deception that's out there. So at least my hope is that things like, Bitcoin and maybe trying to be off the grid, or at least some degree of potential ways to oppose the system. I don't know what y'all's take is, but I believe in trying to live off outside of big metropolitan areas, not because I don't think that we can try to influence people, but we can have a lot more influence on the internet, and a live stream or a podcast can be seen by thousands of people, whereas trying to live inside the city and influence people one-to-one is just is not the best routes to go about it. So that's my take. I would live off the grid as best you can, and I would have try to reach people through the ways that we reach. I try to do a lot of comedic stuff, weird stuff. The younger people like really weird style, kind of Andy Kaufman style comedy humor, that kind of weird stuff that reaches a lot of people. So that's what I would say is the best approach to opposing this system. Of course, I believe Orthodox Christianity, so that's another element of what I think is a good way to fight it.
Ruth, I see your hand.
I just want to say, I cannot believe how many forces are impacting all of us all over the planet at this moment. It is unbelievable. There is no place to hide. There's no place to run to. It is, in the body politic, it's in the economy, it's in the ocean, it's in the air, it's in the soil, it's in the animals. Everything there's a kill that's going on everywhere, and it is life itself. And I feel as though, for me, there's a need to open up our minds to really understand the intrinsic relationship we have with the totality of life. What's happening to a tree, it matters. What's happening to a fish, it matters. What's happening in Afghanistan, it matters. There's so many ways that this mentality that has been oppressing everything it's strangling life everywhere. And I think the more that I am understanding that what's going on in the the climate, and what's going on in the COVID, and it's all one thing. That's all.
I actually have, spent a lot of time thinking about the fact that because it is worldwide, suggests strongly that we really are coming to a very significant transformation moment. But it requires, I think the word they say, it requires people literally waking up. It doesn't mean that you may not be awake at a level. It means that you have to wake up to a larger structure that you're connected to. But the idea that you act locally and think globally, I think is one of the best ways to express how to apply it. You've got to take care of your home base. And remember, the whole idea of globalism is that it shatters the fundamentals of localism. It shatters it. So part of what's happening now is they say the global economic chain is breaking down, and there are things that are going to be used to push us in a certain direction. But I think all of this is literally shaking people awake. So if you want to think of like the role of empire has been literally a wake-up call for the last 7,000 years. Okay, we've been on a 26,000 year cycle, and we are coming around.
Charlotte, could you mute? Sorry.
We're coming around to the end of the great year. This is supposedly, possibly within months. This is imminent. But the idea that we are all playing a role, and I think at some very profound level, we've got to open up to some roles that people have been playing. You may not have liked it, but we're all in the same game. Somehow there has to be a purpose.
I wanted to point out the fact that in terms of what you think you're doing, you don't know how important it is what you're doing, because you're not getting the feedback. The feedback loop, I think, is been broken for each of us intentionally. We got the opportunity to get a sample of that when we did Invisible History. Now, I know, there's a couple of people here have mentioned invisible history as being, foundation work for their understanding. Well, it was a foundation work too for Andy Hess at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, which Ted Elliott had been the dean of in a previous decade. Now, he organized, I found this completely by accident, he organized a class on our book and someone else's book about oil, basically on the idea of these are the arguments you as students are going to have to work against. We're going to teach you in our class at the Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy how to defeat these arguments that are brought forward in this book, okay? So we had the impact. We saw the impact that we had on the highest level of the instruction of American diplomats and American foreign policy thinkers. It was only one example, but it was our example. And so the fact is that you can make a difference. What we did was, once again, we probably laid out a blueprint for them to say, okay, these are the potholes in the road that Paul and Liz have brought forward, and this is how you avoid them. So the fact is that
in order to complete your imperial move.
In order to complete your imperial move, exactly. But the fact is that we did get to them, which means if we got to them, they were listening. So they are listening to what we're saying. They are listening to what Kris has been publishing, to what we've all been talking about for all these years. And the fact is that we have to believe that it will make a difference.
We know it will.
It does.
Speaking of beliefs, Kris, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting sitting in the seat I sit in because, people send me books and people send me their ideas. And, for a long time, they were, exposés telling people about the perfidy and stuff. And then, I got to a certain point where it was saying, hey, there's going to be this paradigm shift. There's going to be these changes. And now I'm getting books about, what to do after these changes happen, how to, new management and different things. So, the universe moves in interesting ways. And I do believe that we're going to see a change that is beyond our ken, whether it will be,
we have a couple more questions in the chat. I want to speak back to Ruth real quick though, because I resonated with the fear that you were describing. If you weren't feeling it, at least I recognize it as a phenomenon among our fellow humans around the globe. And I encourage folks to develop a spiritual imagination, and it's along the lines of all the writers and poets who say in one way or the other, our thoughts become things. And even Paul, in a way, was alluding just now to what quantum physics tells us is that this is a seamless whole, all of reality, not only to each other and every tree and every animal, but to all of the past and all of the future existing simultaneously. So the prime directive is to manage our own state, to not be in fear in order to trust existence as a loving thing and do whatever it takes, no matter how boring or traumatic and torturous your childhood and your whole life has been to this moment. Your hope and mine is taking responsibility for what we think and feel. Now I'm going to get to these things in the chat.
Can I say one more thing?
Can you do it in 30 seconds? Because
Yes,
I see the clock and everything else.
And that is, it's about hermetic principles and about the globalism and the fact that this is a whole world, and the swing to that globalistic power is the dot, is the individual, is the activation of the individual. That's all.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Now, in order of some things here, Todd courteously won't trust his mic, but he wants Jay to hear this question or that Todd posed earlier. And Jay, remember, then I've got like a few others to hit in the next 6 minutes. Jay, what are some, this is Todd who was talking about the Bible and Jesus. What are some the satanic stuff. what are some simplistic things that we can show to those in the dark in order to bring them to the truth?
Well, I mean, my books were focused on using movies and pop culture to show that even the movies and the pop culture at times tells us what's actually going on, sometimes more honestly than the news cycle. So I would pick a few movies, maybe Godfather, Godfather 2, Godfather 3, and say, hey, watch that and see if you don't think that maybe that's the way the system actually works. That would be the first thing that pops in my head. And then other things that I do is I just literally buy global elite books and read the book and then just show them the quotes in the book. And if they won't listen to that, then you might as well just move on. So if they're not going to listen to anything else.
Thank you. John, Jake Klychek.
Just wanted to real quick build on what you mentioned and what Kris mentioned and what Paul has all mentioned, and this idea of not really knowing how the solutions are going to evolve or manifest. And that's going to require a certain type of faith, regardless of what you believe, because you can't predict the outcomes. And I just know doing this that, when I wrote my first article, I was waiting for somebody that I teach as well to the department to see it and get in trouble or fired. And then the book, I thought that was going to happen. And now we're 2 years later, and I took that risk. I took that leap of faith, didn't get fired, met Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, met Kris, met you, Bruce, met Jay, been getting my book out, getting the message out. And so every time you take that leap of faith, doors open. And so you just have to be willing to jump out there. And the other thing is you got to have endurance, right? Because you got to be able to run the test. That's something I've learned as a martial artist, that even if the opponent is bigger and stronger, if you can outlast them, they'll run out of steam eventually. And you will succumb with just that little bit of mustard seed of faith, just that little bit. And as long as you keep acting on it. So
I'm going to insert this mustard seed and then go around our panelists to kind of come in at our self-imposed kind of wire, but we might have some flexibility. And it is along the lines of what John just said, which is to, damn the torpedoes and full steam ahead, full speed ahead. And to remember that you could pave the planet with concrete, and blades of grass are going to burst up, because life is indestructible, and so is our intention to enjoy it and help each other enjoy it. Panelists, in any order, as you are inspired, what would you wrap us in as a farewell and promise for these continuing monthly roundtables that will go on in perpetuity?
Well, since this is the Valediction and it's the memoir, and much of it is my memoir, I want to just point out something I know Jay Dyer has pointed out, and I was very excited by that when I saw it in his book. And I know Kent Bain has done it too. And that is the story, The Prisoner, with Patrick McGowan. I think I was probably 15 years old when that came out. I used to rush home from school to make sure I caught it. It was on a British television program. I think there's 17 episodes. I watched that show and I was drawn into it immediately. And I said, this is what I need to understand. At 15 years old, I was drawn into it.
What's the premise? What should we know?
The premise is that this is a secret agent, a man who thought he was working for one reason, decided that he didn't want to do it anymore and decided to retire, and was whisked away, was gassed, knocked out, and whisked away to a place called the Island, where he was interrogated as to what his primal motivation was in terms of why he didn't want to do it anymore. Why didn't he want to do it? The question is asked of him, when he says, what do you want from me? And they went, information. And he says, you won't get it. And he says, by hook or by crook, we will. And that is what the 17 episodes are all about. The fact is that, as Jay pointed out in his book, he said he is asked a question. He keeps asking the question, actually, who is number one? What is the issue? Who is number one? You are number 6 is the answer, all throughout the entire show. The fact is that if you put a comma in there, you get you are number 6. Who's number one? You are. So the fact is that I'll leave you with this. We are number one. We are all number one. We are connected to it. We are all central intelligence. We are all part of central intelligence. Why don't they put a "the" in front of Central Intelligence? Because we are all it. We are CIA. That's the secret. It's not a secret to us, and it's not a secret anymore.
It's foreshadowing of some mystical and powerful stuff in book 2 coming next year for the Valediction Resurrection, which goes back to my imperative of developing a spiritual imagination. Do yourself a favor, Mr. Millegan.
No, ask Jay about 19, about Prisoner. He has more to say about Prisoner than me.
Jay.
About the prisoner, you said?
Yeah.
What was that?
About the Prisoner, about what Paul just said.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I mean, I didn't watch that until much later in life, maybe 10 years ago, but definitely had an impact on me in that it, really showed it shows a lot of things. I mean, it shows the quantification of society, people being numbers and not people, not having a name or an identity other than a barcode or a number. It shows manipulated dialectics. The village is a global village, they say, in at one point in the series. There's a lot of things going on there that you could write a whole book on that, but yeah, it's a great tool if you wanted to show somebody. I mean, they'd have to have some patience to sit and watch the 17 episodes, which I think is great. I've watched it many times, but not everybody's up for even watching 7. They don't have the attention span to watch a 17 episode show, much less read a book. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say beyond that.
Well, Anthony Sutton, I asked him several times. I says, well, what did looking into this do for your career? And he said it ruined it. But then he also said, these guys are going to fall away from their own evil. And, what we're doing here now is we are creating the new reality, this dynamic of us people sitting and talking to each other is creating a new dynamic. And it's not just happening here. I mean, how many podcasts are there out there now? There's thousands of podcasts. There's tons of people. I mean, Ringo Starr he wants to change the world. A lot of people are working at this, and it's not just us. And it's happening in other countries too, and it's going to continue. So the evil is going to fall on its own accord. It's just going to fall on its own accord. And we need to be there to pick it all up. And we've got, our founding fathers went through a lot of stuff to create this republic, okay? And we don't really need to create a new form of government. We don't need to create a new revolution to create a new form of government. We just need to get the corruption out. And through transparency and through knowledge and through, research, we can, we know who the bad people are. We know what they're doing. Okay. And they just right now, they really have just virtual control through their TV and their ability to, create the sides to get the people to fighting each other. And I want to say again, COVID is really being used by the powers that be to really to get us to fight each other on other things rather than where we need to be fighting them. That's my own thought.
Well, when I discovered what was really going on with 9/11, sometimes I would leave a Target where I would shop and I would put my bags down and I would take out my cell phone and I wasn't talking to anybody. But as people would walk in the store, I would pretend to have a conversation. And I would say things like, yeah, there's no way that fire made those buildings collapse. No, that had to be an inside job. No, the government's been lying since the Kennedy assassination. And after 3 or 4 people, I'd go home. Because when enough of us do stuff like that, it'll help. Like Kris was saying, the folks who serve the masters in the media, tell them to, try to wake them up, examine it until they're satisfied that they either have to try to make a change inside their organization or find another job. And I would say, if you're lucky enough to know anyone in uniform, if you're lucky enough to know any police or anyone in the military, with love and for your love of the truth. What did it do for Anthony Sutton's career? It ruined his career, but it improved his life. If he were here, I bet he would agree, Kris, that at the sacrifice of his career, he became the kind of human being that he was happy to be. We become that human being one decision at a time. Who am I going to be? Every decision's a nice fork in the road. And like John F. Kennedy said in Profiles in Courage, a man or woman does what she must, despite the consequences. And that's all there is to human morality. I could do this all night. Kris, what do we do?
Onwards.
Onwards. Thank you, everybody, for coming. In a couple of days, this will be up on YouTube. And we've been asked in the chats, plug into this every single month through the website, valediction.net, valediction.net, all about Paul and Liz's books and the need to end empire and to bring an end to the use of force over other human beings, and the event page, which will show you the next roundtable.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Amen.
So much for coming.